John was dead. At least that's what the world believed. A car crash on the highway, a fiery explosion, a body burned beyond recognition. The news spread fast. John Matthews, heir to a multi-million-dollar empire, had died on impact. His grieving wife, Susan, was devastated, or at least that's what she wanted people to think. I watched it all unfold from the shadows. The funeral was grand, attended by hundreds, with Susan standing at the front, dressed in black, tears streaming down her face. She clutched my wedding band in her trembling fingers, her sobs so convincing that even I, hidden in the distance, almost believed her. Almost, but grief isn't supposed to look rehearsed. The night before my death, I had discovered the text messages. Dennis, my best friend, my brother in all but blood. Now that he's out of the way, we can finally be together. That was what she had sent him the moment the news broke. The woman I had loved for 10 years had moved on in less than 10 minutes. I had spent a decade building a life around Susan, giving her everything she ever wanted. I turned a blind eye to the distant looks, the forced smiles, the way she always hesitated before saying, "I love you too." I told myself I was overthinking it. That love, real love, took time, but love wasn't what she had for me. I was a convenience, a stepping stone, a name that secured her future. And now I was gone. But I wasn't the only one playing a role. Susan had fooled the world into believing she was a heartbroken widow. I had fooled her into believing she was finally free. In reality, I was watching, waiting, counting down the days until the truth destroyed her. I was never supposed to be the kind of man who doubted his wife. For 10 years, I had given Susan everything: love, security, a life most women could only dream of. When I met her, she was bright-eyed and full of ambition, a woman who carried herself with an effortless grace that made men turn their heads. But she chose me. Or at least, that's what I had always believed. We met at a charity gala, one of those high society events where the room was filled with artificial smiles and champagne glasses that never emptied. She had walked in wearing a navy blue dress, her dark hair falling in waves over her shoulders. There was something about her presence that pulled people in, a quiet confidence that made her stand out in a sea of perfectly rehearsed socialites. I was a man of logic, never one to believe in fate or love at first sight. But Susan made me rethink. That she wasn't just beautiful, she was sharp, quick-witted, the kind of woman who could hold her own in a room full of business sharks and walk away the victor. I admired her. I wanted her. And when she looked at me with those deep, knowing eyes, I was convinced that she wanted me too. Our relationship moved fast. Within a year, we were married. Our wedding was a grand affair, covered in every high-end magazine praised as the perfect union of power and elegance. To the world, we were untouchable, a golden couple, the kind of love story that people envied. But behind closed doors, things were different. Susan was never cruel, never overtly distant. She played the role of a loving wife well enough that I never had reason to question her. But love, real love, is something you feel, and I never truly felt it from her. At first, I ignored it. I convinced myself that some people just weren't overly affectionate, that maybe her love was quieter, more reserved. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, that gnawed at me. The way she hesitated before saying, "I love you." The way she pulled away just a second too soon when I kissed her. The way she never truly looked at me when she thought I wasn't watching. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being insecure, that marriage wasn't about constant reassurance. Then, Dennis entered the picture. Dennis had been my best friend since college. We built our businesses side by side, fought through failures together, celebrated each other's wins. He was the closest thing I had to a brother. When I introduced him to Susan, she was polite, friendly even. But something about the way she looked at him made my stomach twist. It wasn't obvious, not something anyone else would have noticed, but I did. It was in the way her eyes lingered just a little too long, the way her lips curved into a barely there smile whenever he spoke, the way she seemed lighter around him, more present. But Dennis was my friend. He would never betray me, and Susan was my wife. She had chosen me. So, I buried the doubt. I let years pass without ever voicing the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Until the night before my accident. I had been working late, buried in reports, when Susan's phone lit up beside me. A message. I wasn't the kind of man who checked his wife's phone, but something about the way it flashed caught my attention. Dennis, just hold on a little longer. He'll be gone soon. The world stopped. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. She replied seconds later. I can't wait. I love you. The words burned themselves into my brain. I read them once, twice, a third time, as if they would somehow change. I had given this woman everything. 10 years of my life, my love, my trust. And all the while, she had been waiting for me to disappear. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt something far more dangerous. Clarity. I made my decision right then and there. I wasn't going to confront her. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of guilt or excuses. No, I was going to give her exactly what she wanted. I was going to disappear. But not in the way she expected. If she was so desperate to be free of me, I would grant her wish. I would die, and then I would watch. And when the time was right, I would return. Not as her husband, not as the man who loved her, but as the man who would destroy her. The night I died, Susan was in our bed, curled under silk sheets, completely unaware that everything she had built was about to come crashing down. I stood at the doorway watching her sleep, memorizing the way she looked, so peaceful, so untouched by guilt. How easy it was for her to rest while I stood there, suffocating under the weight of her betrayal. She had sent Dennis a final message before she went to bed. Tomorrow, we'll be free. Free. That word echoed in my mind as I slipped out of the house for what would be the last time as John Matthews, her husband. I had spent the entire day planning. The crash had to be believable. The fire had to be strong enough to leave nothing behind. The body, one of my private security men who matched my build, had to be unrecognizable. Every detail had to be perfect. And it was. By sunrise, my death was national news. My wife, the grieving widow, gave a statement through tears. She played her part beautifully. The world pitied her. Social media flooded with tributes to our love, our legacy. People mourned the tragic loss of a man who had everything. I watched it all unfold from the shadows, unseen and unheard, waiting for the moment Susan would finally show her true colors. It didn't take long. 2 days after my funeral, I saw Dennis walk into our house. Our house. He used the key I had given Susan. The same key she swore she never shared with anyone. The same house where we had built our life together. Where we celebrated anniversaries, where I had once held her and thought we had forever. Now, another man was standing in my place. I followed them through hidden cameras I had installed months ago. Not for Susan, I never had a reason to spy on my wife. But for business security, or so I had told myself. Maybe deep down, I had always suspected something. They sat together on the couch, his hand resting too comfortably on her knee. She wasn't mourning. There was no grief in her eyes, no hesitation in the way she leaned into him, and then she spoke. He's finally gone. Those words should have hurt. They should have broken me, but they didn't, because I was no longer the man who loved Susan. I was the man who was going to make sure she regretted everything. Dennis ran his fingers through her hair, pulling her closer. "We don't have to hide anymore," he murmured. And then they kissed. It wasn't passionate. It wasn't filled with the fire of a forbidden love that had been restrained for years. It was easy, familiar, the kind of kiss shared between people who had been together long before my death. They hadn't been waiting for me to die so they could be together. They had already been together. I felt nothing. Not heartbreak, not jealousy, not even rage. I felt satisfaction. Because now, there were no doubts, no lingering questions. No excuses Susan could make if I ever confronted her. I had all the proof I needed. Now, I just had to decide how long I wanted to let her believe she had won before I took it all away. I let a week pass. Then 2. I watched her slip seamlessly into her new life, watched how easily she erased me from her world. She didn't visit my grave. She didn't keep any of our photos up. She didn't even wear the wedding ring she had sobbed over in front of cameras. Instead, she attended high-profile events with Dennis, keeping a respectful distance, playing the part of the grieving widow when necessary. But behind closed doors, she was already moving forward, already planning a new life that no longer had my name attached to it. A month after my death, she put our house up for sale. Our house. She didn't even hesitate. That was when I knew it was time. She had gotten too comfortable. She thought the nightmare was over. She had no idea it was just beginning. I had thought I would feel pain, some unbearable grief that would settle deep in my chest and never let go. But all I felt was a slow, creeping numbness. The kind of numbness that comes after betrayal so sharp, it severs something inside you. For 10 years, I had been a husband, a provider, a man who believed in love, in loyalty. I had built my life around a woman who had never truly been mine. I had given her everything, and she had discarded me like I was nothing. I watched her from a distance, moving on with effortless ease. The first week, she barely left the house. She played the grieving widow, perfectly. Black dresses, puffy eyes, well-timed tears when the cameras were near. But when the doors closed, when she thought no one was watching, the mask slipped. She drank wine and laughed at old inside jokes with Dennis. She let him hold her hand, stroke her hair, whisper things in her ear that made her smile in a way I had never seen before. 2 weeks in, the whispers began, quiet rumors circulating in the elite circles of the city. She doesn't look that heartbroken. It's strange, isn't it? How quickly she's recovering. Dennis started staying over. First for a night, then for 2. Then he never left. I wasn't just erased. I was replaced. And yet, I didn't break. I thought about Susan when I lay awake at night, but not in the way I used to. No longer with longing, no longer with love. I thought about how she had taken the life I built and handed it to another man. I thought about the messages she had sent Dennis while I had been by her side, blind to it all. And most of all, I thought about the moment she would realize that I had never really left. The moment she would see me standing in front of her, breathing, alive. The moment she would understand that her carefully crafted lie was about to collapse. The moment she would break. But for now, I let the suspense build. I let her believe she was free. Because the longer she thought she had won, the harder. The fall would be when I finally revealed the truth. The house sold faster than I expected. 1 month after my death, Susan finalized the deal. I watched from a distance as she handed over the keys, her expression smooth, untouched by sentiment. No hesitation. No last glance at the home where we had built our life together. She had erased me. I should have expected it. But then she did. Something I hadn't seen coming. She withdrew all the money from our joint account. Every cent. Legally, as my widow, she had control over my assets. My death certificate had already been processed. And with that, she was now the sole beneficiary of my wealth. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about love. It was never just about Dennis. It was about power. Susan had been planning this for years. This wasn't the impulsive affair of a lonely wife. This wasn't a woman who had simply fallen, out of love and into someone else's arms. This was calculated. A strategy. She had waited for the perfect moment. She had played the perfect role. And the second I was out of the way, she had taken everything. The business, the house, the money. Dennis was nothing more than a pawn in her game. I had underestimated her. I thought she had betrayed me for love. But love had never been part of the equation. I watched as she and Dennis moved into a new penthouse, far more extravagant than the home we had shared. Lavish parties, expensive vacations, the kind of lifestyle she had once claimed she didn't care about. But I saw it now. Susan had never been satisfied being my wife. She had wanted to be the one in control. She had wanted my empire, my status, my name without me attached to it, and she had it. For now. She thought she had won. But the game wasn't over. It had never been over. Because I wasn't dead. And soon, Susan was going to wish I had been. Night Susan lost everything. She was wearing the same navy blue dress she had worn the night we met. It was ironic, really. Back then, she had been the woman who stole my breath away, the woman I thought was my future. And now, standing under the glittering lights of a grand ballroom, she was nothing more than a stranger, a woman who had orchestrated my downfall, who had betrayed me so seamlessly, it almost felt rehearsed, almost. I had spent the past months in the shadows, watching her move on as if I had never existed. I let her believe she had won, that I was just a forgotten name in the past, a stepping stone in her rise to power. But tonight, that illusion was about to shatter. The event was a charity gala, the kind she thrived in, the kind where cameras flashed, where power players whispered, deals over champagne, where appearances were everything. And Susan had perfected hers. She walked through the crowd with ease, laughing, shaking hands, her fingers intertwined with Dennis's, as if he had always been the man by her side. As if I had never mattered. I waited. I let her bask in her victory for just a little longer, and then, when the moment was right, I stepped into the light. The effect was immediate. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. The entire room shifted as people turned, eyes widening, whispers spreading like wildfire. And then Susan saw me. For a moment, she didn't move. Her grip on Dennis's arm tightened, her lips parting slightly, but no words came out. Her body went rigid, her face drained of color. It was the first time I had ever seen her truly speechless. I let the silence stretch, let her drown in it. Then, finally, I smiled. Surprised to see me, darling? Her reaction was delayed, as if her brain refused to process what was happening, and then she laughed, a short, breathless laugh, forced and brittle, cracking at the edges. This is impossible, she whispered. You're dead. Dennis took a step forward, instinctively, shielding her. Who the hell are you? He demanded, eyes darting to Susan as if searching for an answer. I tilted my head, amused. You don't recognize me? My gaze flicked to Susan. I suppose that makes sense. After all, she worked so hard to erase me. The room was silent, the weight of the moment suffocating. Susan's hands were trembling now, barely noticeable, but I saw it. I saw the way her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard, the way her mind was racing for an escape, an explanation, anything to undo what was happening. But there was no undoing this. I took a step closer. Tell me, Susan, what was it like? My voice was calm, controlled, almost conversational. Knowing you got away with it? Knowing you had everything? Did you celebrate? Did you and Dennis toast to your success? Her breath hitched. Or was it all business for you? I continued, my tone light but sharp. Did you mourn me for the cameras, then run straight to the bank to claim what was mine? Her composure cracked then. I saw it in the flicker of panic in her eyes, in the slight quiver of her lips. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. I cut her off. I understand that while I was lying low, watching, waiting, you were spending my money, selling my house, living in my world like it was yours to take. The weight of my words pressed down on her. You were dead, she said again, almost desperate. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I was watching. Dennis finally found his voice, stepping between us. I don't know what kind of sick joke this is, but if you think you can just shut up. The sharpness of my tone stunned him into silence. I turned back to Susan. You made a mistake. Her eyes darted around the room as if searching for an exit, but there was none. Cameras were on her now. People were recording. The illusion was collapsing. John, please, she tried again, her voice softer now, pleading. It was pathetic. I loved you, I said, and I felt nothing as I said it. I gave you everything. She swallowed hard. And you threw me away like I was nothing. She flinched. The room was suffocatingly quiet, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. I pulled a folder from my jacket, and then I handed her the final blow. This is everything. My voice was steady. Bank records, transactions, property transfers, evidence of the will you forged. Her face turned ghostly pale. I turned to the cameras. This is the woman you all thought was grieving. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Panic flashed in her eyes. She grabbed my wrist, her nails digging into my skin. We can fix this, she whispered. John, please. We can fix this. I laughed. Fix this? I repeated, shaking my head. Susan, it's already over. I leaned in just enough for her to hear the final words I would ever say to her. You lost. Then I turned, walking away as her world crumbled behind me. I walked out of the gala, leaving Susan behind as her carefully built world came crashing down around her. I didn't need to turn around to see the damage I had inflicted. The whispers, the judgmental stares, the way Dennis shifted uncomfortably as if realizing too late that he had bet on the wrong woman. Susan had spent months thinking she had won, but in the span of mere minutes, I had taken everything from her. It was poetic. The woman who thought she could rewrite history, erase my existence, and build a future on the ruins of my supposed death was now drowning in the truth. I took a deep breath as I stepped outside, letting the cold night air settle over me. This was it. The end. But as I reached the car waiting for me, I heard the sound of footsteps, rushed, desperate. John, wait! Susan's voice cut through the night, raw and shaking. I didn't stop. I didn't owe her anything. Please, just listen to me, she begged, reaching for my arm. For the first time in months, I let her touch me. But instead of warmth, all I felt was emptiness. I turned slowly, meeting her gaze. Her face was different now, stripped of the confidence, the cold calculation. There was no mask left to wear. She was just a woman unraveling at the seams, realizing she had overplayed her hand. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered. I raised an eyebrow. Didn't mean for what to happen, Susan? I asked, my voice steady. Didn't mean to betray me? Didn't mean to spend my money? Didn't mean to fall into bed with Dennis before my body was even cold? She flinched at every word. I loved you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. No, you didn't, I said. You loved what I gave you. You loved the security, the power, but you never loved me. Her eyes filled with tears. Maybe for the first time, they were real. Maybe for the first time, she realized what she had truly lost. I made a mistake, she admitted, her voice breaking. I thought I wanted something else. But when you were gone, John, Stop. My voice was cold, final. You don't get to rewrite this story. You don't get to stand here and act like I was ever more than an obstacle in your way. She shook her head rapidly. No, it wasn't like that. But it was. I stepped closer, watching as she struggled to hold herself together. I let you believe you won, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I let you think you were free, that you had finally gotten rid of me. And I watched. I watched how quickly you moved on, how easily you spent my money, how little you cared. Her bottom lip trembled, and for a second, I thought she was going to collapse. I was wrong, she choked out. It didn't matter. You were, I agreed. But not about your feelings for me. Her breath hitched. You were wrong to think I wouldn't come back. She let out a shaky sob, shaking her head. Please, John, it's done. Those two words destroyed her. She reached for me again, but this time, I pulled away before she could touch me. You wanted to be free, Susan, I said, my voice emotionless. Well, now you are. But it's not the freedom you wanted, is it? Broken sound escaped her lips, something between a sob and a breathless plea. I took a step back. Enjoy the life you built, Susan. Without me, without my money, without my name. Her eyes widened in horror. What do you mean? I smiled. I froze the accounts this morning. Her entire body went still. The money is gone, I continued. The properties, the assets, everything you thought was yours. I made sure the courts would look into your forged will. By tomorrow, you'll have nothing. Her hands flew to her mouth, a silent gasp escaping her lips. No, you can't. I already did. The devastation on her face was almost satisfying, almost. Dennis won't save you, I added, twisting the knife. Do you think he wants to be with a woman who's broke? A woman drowning in scandal? She looked over her shoulder, as if just realizing something. Dennis hadn't followed her outside. I tilted my head. You think he'll stay? I asked, amused. You think he loves you? She turned back to me, eyes frantic. John, please. But I was done. I opened the car door and slid inside. The last thing I saw before the door closed was Susan standing there, trembling, broken, lost. I had finally taken everything from her. And the best part? I hadn't even laid a hand on her. The truth had destroyed her far better than I ever could. As the driver pulled away, I leaned back in my seat, staring out the window. I should have felt victorious. I had gotten my revenge. I had made her regret everything. But all I felt was freedom. Real, unshackled freedom. I was finally done with Susan, and for the first time in 10 years, I was truly free.